Hello, everybody, and welcome. We see lots and lots of people still joining. The numbers are actually climbing as we speak. We have about 166 participants, and I am so delighted to actually be here as your host and moderator tonight. My name is Anita Kapoor. I am also a United World College of Southeast Asia proud alumni, class of '89, and very grateful to be part of tonight with all of you, navigating learning in the 21st century. Tonight, we are in conversation on reimagining the future of learning, teaching, and thinking at this most important time in history. Through questioning, pondering, hopefully enlightening and informing the future, leading to realizations and actions globally. You know, as always, United World College of Southeast Asia's approach is peace and sustainability, and that threads through this entire series, and especially tonight. And these are two amongst the many life skills that I personally learned there, and they have carried me all the way from 1983 to 2020, and will continue to see me through the rest of my life, I know very much. All right, to formally introduce this event and explain a little bit more about it, I will hand over to former diplomat, author, founding dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy and former United World College Southeast Asia board chair, Kishore Mahbubani, the patron and namesake of this UWCSEA Kishore Mahbubani Speaker Series. And after that, I will introduce all of my panelists and tell you a few housekeeping notes, and then away we will go. So I'm going to hand it over to Kishore first.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our series, Reimagining Learning. The series launches with an exploration of the world our children will meet. We will consider current trends and future possibilities, drawing from experience, insights, and expertise from across our region and beyond. It will help us to understand the skills and values that will be required and should be fostered to navigate that world. Tonight's dialogue will set the scene for our series and ongoing discussion. I'm delighted to officially open the series.
Absolutely fantastic. It's almost like Kishore was here with us. Thank you so much, Kishore, for opening this series and in your namesake. And I think we're going to have a very robust and very important and pivotal discussion tonight. I don't know about you guys, but I'm always excited to see how many participants there are. We're almost hit 190, and I think we'll have well over 200 by the time we get into this. All right, just to let you guys know how it's all going to pan out tonight, we'll have two keynotes, as you would have seen in the introductions online, and followed by a lively panel discussion. Will run till about 8:30 p.m. With a 5-minute break after the second keynote. That's to grab water and get your questions ready and so on. We encourage all of you to please use the Q&A function. We will be, of course, curating all of the questions because we want to get all of the most urgent ones out and answered. But please, of course, keep keep that whole area ticking over because we really want all of your interactivity tonight. Very quickly, I'd like to just introduce my panel who are lurking behind their cameras. Hi, everybody. We're just waiting for Musimbi as well to turn on. Hey, fantastic. So we've got Tom Fletcher joining from Oxford, Parag Khanna joining us from Singapore, and then Musimbi Kanyoro will join us a little bit later on, but she is in Nairobi, and she's kindly agreed to join the panel discussion. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Anita.
Hello.
It's fantastic. You know, it's always funny, right? I have done so many of these, and so have you done so many of these. And in the beginning, no one ever knows really what to say. Should there be lots of hand movements? Should you say hi? Should you just be quiet? So I'm just so happy to have all of you here. And I know that we're going to be listening to a great presentation, a great keynote, and having a great discussion together. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Can't wait.
Thanks, Anita.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So a few housekeeping rules, everybody, and if you've just joined us, welcome. Our numbers are still going up, of course. We want tonight to obviously be interactive. It's not about just us talking at you, it's talking with you, and that's how we will reimagine learning. The moderated panel discussion will take place after the keynotes, so please, of course, with the keynotes, if you have questions, send them through the Q&A. We will have a team monitoring the Q&A, as I mentioned before, and we'll consolidate them to answer during the panel discussion. So as I said, submit any of your questions through the Q&A function in Zoom, and be specific if it is for a particular person you'd like to have answer it. The session will be recorded and shared along with the student speaker panel discussion under Big Ideas, and that will be available on the UWCSEA website. So just to give you all an idea of who's in the audience, because we can't quite see each other, but we know that we're there, so thank you. Tonight we have UWCSEA students, staff, and parents joining us alongside guests from Singapore and across the world. I know that I sent it out to all of my chats and all of my UWC chats, and there are many people who have signed up, but we have people outside of the UWC family as well, and I'm so grateful and thankful to have all of you here. We can also see many guests who work in schools of higher education context, as well as in government, business, NGOs, and of course, UWC International. So we thought that it might be a really great idea to start with a quick poll, and we'll return to the results of that poll later this evening. So we're about to run that poll, and if you would please just select the option that you think most needs to transform. And the question that you'll be being answered is, in the current educational landscape, what most needs to transform so that students are prepared for the future? And we have 6 different options, so please go ahead and do that. We'll give you a minute to submit your answers, and we will reveal the contents and the results of the poll toward the end. So as I give you guys just that minute, I am going to start beginning to introduce Tom, who I know is waiting for me, because Tom is going to do his keynote in a slightly different way, which I absolutely love. He said he wants me to interrupt him, which is the most glorious thing for a facilitator and a host, to be able to interrupt the keynote. It's like, wow, I can't believe it. And I also want to remind everybody else that Tom is, and he's made it very clear to us that he's really keen to interact with all of you through his keynote as well. So please keep those Q&As coming. Tom, you have such a career and a life, and I have a really long introduction. So, and I've decided that I am not going to cut it short, but you might, the moment I'm done, don't forget to unmute, because there's always one person who doesn't unmute. All right, fantastic. Tom Fletcher. In September 2020, Tom returned to Hertford College at Oxford University as elected principal. This position affords him a very unique opportunity to put his passion into practice as he seeks to expand access to education that will, in his own words, nurture the next advances in human ingenuity. Tom's passion for educational transformation so as to address the needs of the world, to address the needs of the world of our young people will inherit has been shaped in no small part by his career in diplomacy. He was foreign policy advisor to 3 UK prime ministers between 2007 and 2011, before serving as the UK ambassador to Lebanon between 2011 and 2015. The following year, he led a review of British diplomacy for the UK Foreign Office, and in 2017, then led a review on the future of the United Nations for the UN Secretary General. In this period, he released a best-selling book, provocatively titled, and it's on the future of statecraft, called The Naked Diplomat: Power and Politics in the Digital Age. And he also, amongst all of this, found time to be a visiting professor at New York University. He was also a founding member of the Global Tech Panel, a group which facilitates dialogue between governments and tech leaders to find practical ways to work together to meet the challenges of the digital age. He is also project director of Towards Global Learning Goals, a nonprofit coalition of advocates, educators, technologists, business people, diplomats, parents, and progressive thinkers. I think they all are progressive thinkers. Their quest is to influence educational transformation beyond the bounds of nationalized or for-profit educational systems. Kindling the Flame, their second report, was released in 2018. It identifies 9 global learning goals which prioritize international development of global citizenship, character traits and key skills that will equip the next generation to leverage the technology of tomorrow for the benefit of humankind and to thrive in the 21st century and beyond. He writes regularly for the National, Prospect, and other publications, and is currently working on a new book on 21st century statecraft. Tom's thought leadership in this area is therefore informed by extensive experience and exposure to thinking across a multitude of arenas. Tonight, he will share what he has learned along the way. I expect he will spark new ideas for many in our audience as he outlines his thinking about the need for a revolution in how and what humans learn, and then lays out perhaps a roadmap for reform. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Anita, and I'm delighted to see that we're over 200 participants now. I do hope we'll still be 200 in about half an hour's time. That's my challenge. Anita will interrupt me if she sees the numbers falling too fast. I'm so glad to have the chance to join you all. I wish I was there in person this evening in Singapore. Instead, I'm here on a rainy Oxford morning, and I'm zooming in really from the very heart of Oxford. For those of you who know the city, just outside the window here is the Radcliffe Camera and the Bodleian. So in a way, we're right in the heart of some of the most traditional education on the planet. And maybe a great place then to start this conversation today about the future of education on the planet. I'm so glad to be joining UWC today because the good news is that you as a collective, as a community, are already great pioneers of much of what I'll be talking about today. You really are sort of setting the pace on many of these ideas. And in the reports we've done on the future of learning, we often come back to UWC as a model for others to follow. I'll come back to all of that in due course. As Anita says, I'm a recovering ambassador. And so part of what I'm going to try and do today is to try and explain how a diplomat ended up stumbling into this education space, why those two passions of mine, diplomacy and education, come together. Incidentally, Anita also mentioned that I'm a former foreign policy advisor to 3 prime ministers on one trip to China. And this is maybe a lesson in why translation matters so much. I couldn't work out why my Chinese colleagues were looking at my nameplate that said foreign policy advisor and laughing and nudging each other and giggling. And so I asked one of the Chinese speakers, what's the problem here? Why are they laughing at my title, foreign policy advisor? It turned out my real title in that job was the private secretary for foreign affairs to the Prime Minister, the private secretary for foreign affairs. And that had been mistranslated as the Prime Minister's intimate typist for his affairs overseas. And so it turned out that everyone we were talking to thought that I was the person who followed the Prime Minister around, writing his love letters for him. I can promise you that of all the things I did for 3 Prime Ministers, I never wrote any love letters at all. So today's about the future of learning. And as Anita says, what I most want to do is open up this conversation. This is just to put some ideas out there to really start a conversation with you all today. And I hope it will be as interactive as possible. So I want to start by
interactive because we've already got a question coming in. So take it away, and I will give you that question in a second. Okay. Okay.
You tell me when you want to chip in. I'll be all ready for you. The conversations I want to start, 3 conversations really, just to frame this. The first one was with a 15-year-old student called Elsa, who I met recently in Paris before the lockdown, before this strange, uncertain year that we've all had. And Elsa had actually quit her school in Paris. She dropped out. But she wasn't a classic school dropout. Actually, she's now just, in the last cycle, completely aced her baccalaureate. And she's now writing a guide for other young people, other students who want to drop out, called How to Hack the Back. And she said to me in a whisper in this restaurant in Paris, it's already happening. Young people are taking control of their future. Now, I'm not here to tell all of you who are at UWC now that you should be dropping out and taking control of your future, but I want you to hold that idea in mind when we think about how education is going to change. A second conversation in a refugee camp in Beirut, where I was the ambassador from 2011 to 2015, and I talked to Jamal, a 12-year-old Syrian refugee who'd been out of formal education for 4 years. His family in Homs had fled the barrel bombs of Bashar al-Assad over the border. And the rain was pouring down around us on the tent outside, but his eyes were just shining with excitement when I said to him that we might be supporting the building of a UNICEF school in the camp. And he said, do you know why this matters so much to me? Because I want to be an astronaut. I want to go and find safer planets. Third conversation, Charlie, a 12-year-old British pupil in Abu Dhabi. Now, Charlie's very lucky. Like many of the students at UWC, he's learning from some of the greatest teachers on the planet in a very secure, positive environment. The contrast with Jamal could not be clearer. But because he's part of a family of migrants himself who move around between countries, like many of the parents at UWC, he's actually in his 4th education system in 8 years. And what he finds is there's very little overlap between what is taught between those different education systems. And he says to me, why are the French and the British systems so different? He started out in a French school in Lebanon. And why are we memorizing things which we could actually look up online? So those are 3 conversations which may be familiar actually to many of you, but for me really set up this challenge that we face, because we hear a lot at the moment about the impact on politics and society of 3 big, really staggering trends. One is a political one, the rapid rise of distrust in anything that looks like authority. And this is not just in my world of maps and chaps and diplomacy and government, flags. It's also in the media. It's in the city, in business. People feel less and less trust. The more agency that the smartphone gives them, the less that they trust hierarchy and authority. And we know from the research that that also extends to a rising distrust in medical systems. And we've seen that through the pandemic, and also in education systems. We all know that the first thing that we all do once we've had that appointment with a doctor is to go and consult Dr. Google to check whether we agree with the prescription we've just been given. We all know that we have all these WhatsApp groups among the parents of the different classes our kids are in, where we're debating what's going on in school in a way that our parents never did. So that rise of distrust is the first factor we need to be aware of. The second factor is a very rapid rise. It's an economic factor in this perception of inequality. Many of you will have seen that famous YouTube video where you have 2 monkeys in cages next to each other. Both get given more food and both are very happy. Then one gets given even more food than the other. And the one who's been given more food but not as much as the first monkey goes ballistic, rips apart the cage. So frustrated and angry that the monkey next to him has got more food. And this is, of course, Make America Great Again. It's the rise of extremism in Europe and across the world. This perception that other people somewhere else are living a much better life than we are. And this is really reshaping geopolitics at the moment, this rise of the perception of inequality. And then the third big trend, which is reshaping everything, but also education, is of course a more existential one around the rapid technological transformation of our planet. I wrote in The Naked Diplomat of how in the next 1 century we'll go through as much technological change as in the last 43 centuries, which is like going from cave paintings to the atom bomb to driverless cars in the lifetime of the kids who are currently at school. And that is going to change power completely. So you've got these 3 trends that we're feeling buffeted by, even before the pandemic. We can see this happening around us, but we're very uncertain how to respond. My argument today is that for each of these trends, the rise of distrust, the rise of the perception of inequality, and our more existential fear about technological change, of course the answer lies in education. How do we ensure that humans now learn the right things in the right ways? Are they currently learning things in the right way? And if not, why not?
Before you go on, I'm going to actually, we have a great question from Peter, who's watching us, Peter Howe, and it says, a human's potential is unknown and unknowable, and yet maximizing potential is the why of education. How do we hold space to allow for potential to be realized versus squashed by the one-size-fits-all approach of the current batch delivery education system with its standardized summative assessment? And I would take that and apply that to what you were just talking about the very fact that, the information that you received was certainly not one size fits all, just using those two examples of which there are millions. And when you put that together with the whole, it's not a perception of inequality. There is great inequality in the world. I think the perception comes from not knowing enough about one another. But I think that really what's happened is that everybody now, and through technology, wants to have agency, and rightfully so, because agency has been taken away from them. And I think that's what you are speaking to right now.
I think, in a way, it's a great summing up, really, of the argument I want to make, because I think it is a sad truth at the moment that most young people on the planet are learning the wrong things in the wrong ways. And as the question says, too often we fail to spark the kind of the delight and the magic of learning. Instead we force feed kids what we ourselves learned in previous generations for a different set of challenges, without recognizing how different their lives will actually be. So the content we teach, the assessment that we put in front of kids, focuses on classic academic knowledge rather than character and skills. It focuses on the head and not the hand and the heart. And what we actually need is a much more rounded approach to education that does head, hand, and heart. Because at the moment, if you look at the league tables, the exams that the question mentioned, they continue to focus on very, very conventional testing and exam results. And I think as a result, a generation on the move, whether it's Jamal from the Syrian refugee camp or Charlie in Abu Dhabi, are not going to be equipped with the skills that they need. And the result actually will hit my world of diplomacy and government, because polarization will increase, extremism will increase, inequality, drift, intolerance, and distrust will increase. And actually, we will see the rise of more extremist leaders as a result. So I think this matters not just to educators, but actually it should matter much, much more to all of us in society. And for me, actually, the reason I became so passionate about this topic came from these different experiences. Firstly, being a parent of two boys, including, by the way, Charlie, who I mentioned earlier on, and agonizing over what they need to know to live a good life. What are the ideas and the values that we inherit from our parents, our grandparents, our ancestors? What are the most important values that we should be passing on to the next generation? I think all of us as parents agonize over those issues all the time. Every mother and father becomes a story bearer, a sort of bridge between the past and the future. And it's right that we really think very carefully about the best of what we pass on. That really is the secret, I think, to being a good ancestor. For me, the second part of the experience that led me to this discussion with you today was that experience working in the Middle East. So I arrived as ambassador in Beirut, age 36, when the Arab Spring was raging around us. It's just up the road from me, in Damascus, of course. I lived 1 hour from Damascus, literally on the road to Damascus. And I saw what happened across the region when kids were being taught in sectarian or authoritarian education systems. Then when they were taught to see the difference in each other rather than what brought them together. And actually, we've now seen those same arguments playing out in many of our own societies. This this idea that's under challenge at the moment, that actually we have more in common than what divides us, has led to, you know, even friends of mine have suffered from that, and one MP even died for it in the UK, that concept. And all of that after a whole century in which we sacrificed so much energy and time and blood, really, trying to work out the answer to that question. You know, Rudyard Kipling, who many of the students I hope have studied, lamented, you know, the burnt fool's bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the fire. You know, saying we make these same mistakes again. We don't learn from our history. Maybe the update for 2020 is to say the sunburnt fool's finger goes wobbling back to Twitter. But anyway, enough about the American election.
But Tom, I have to say, I have to interject at this point. I really, everything that you're speaking about for me is really, you know, I've done a few of these, both now for education and also in the commercial world, and everyone is feeling the same way. And I think we have been actually given a real gift. And it's not a gift for everybody, but there is a gift over this last 9 to 10 months, having been in lockdown and having shared an experience across the world. And it's actually given us time to pause, because education, just like everything else, was on this high roll forward. And like, you know, the question that Peter asked for, you know, batch delivery, standardized summative assessment, that was going on in every part of the world. And I know we have a question later that we're going to talk about, where we talk about who makes the changes now? You know, is it higher learning? Is it secondary school? Is it primary school? Is it at home? And really, I think what you're talking about is a combination of these things, because as the caregivers to the children, as the teachers, as the institutions, actually everybody has a shared responsibility to this. But I think we have to remember why we're doing it. And I think that's where heart comes in, don't you think? Because if we just look at it as automation of our children and automation of society, which is what we've had all this time, we're never going to get to the heart.
Absolutely. And the argument I'd want to make is that this is not just a challenge for the most vulnerable people on the planet, but also for people who are already in very advanced education systems. So just to compare those two, you know, when I worked on the Syrian refugee crisis, and, you know, wherever you stand on who's responsible for the industrial slaughter in Syria, we have to agree that it shouldn't be those million kids out of school who are paying the price for what's going on there. But when you talk to people there time and time again, parents will say that what they want is education for their kids. That's the first thing they ask for when they get to Cyprus or Greece or France or the UK or wherever they're taking refuge is, you know, where are the schools? How do I get education? You know, and yet, you know, migrants in Europe now are twice as likely to end up dropping out of school. A Syrian refugee can go through 5 different education systems before settling somewhere. Think you know, of your own kids going through 5 different education systems, the strain that would put on them. And globally, 6 out of 10 kids can't read or write at the moment. 75 million kids are not in education at all. So you've got one challenge at that end, among poor communities. But at the other end, as the pandemic, as you say, the pandemic has really shown us this, there's this, we can see that there's an urgent need to change, because technology and automation will bring new threats to all of us. States, ideas, industries will go out of business. The Davos elite will tell us that 2/3 of young people will work in jobs that don't yet exist. So we're preparing young people at the moment for a completely different world, a completely different workplace. And with previous shifts like this, industrial revolutions, the printing press, we had decades and sometimes centuries to adapt as humans. And we don't have the luxury. We don't have that luxury this time. And so I think that managing this shift to a different education system, to a different way of learning, is actually the greatest challenge of our era. But our political and social systems are overwhelmed. They're not able to make the change that they need to. So how is it, you know, this is the struggle, and this is what I want to come on to. Why is it that in a world of such extraordinary daring and ingenuity and creativity and brilliance, that we find it so hard to deliver such a basic right as trying to help young people learn the right things in the right way. So I think someone, if you like, onto what that is then. Sorry.
Because I have a beautiful question that asks why. It maybe answers it as well, and it says, how do we overcome the stigma that emotions aren't relevant for education?
I think it's a brilliant question. The reality is that we show that it is the emotional skills that will ensure that the robots work for our kids and the kids don't work for the robots. It's those emotional skills, empathy, curiosity, creativity, that really will set our young people apart. They'll be the last things to be automated. And so ultimately, when we talk about those 2/3 of jobs that will disappear in the next 20, 30 years, the jobs that will survive will be those that require those emotional skills. So there is a very real world, practical rationale for the changes I'm talking about. This is not just about the fact that we need to be nicer to each other. There is actually a survival question at stake here. So my argument is that we need these learning goals of the head, the hand, and the heart. That doesn't mean getting rid of the head. It doesn't mean getting rid of knowledge. You know, we still have to learn the best of what our ancestors left us. I think there are 3 really strong learning goals, important learning goals for the head. The first is to understand the history of ingenuity. You know, I mentioned going from cave paintings to driverless cars. How do we make those steps? Helping our young people to really understand those breakthroughs in human ingenuity will help them to adapt to the next challenges that we face in the future. I think a second one for the head, for knowledge, is actually learning how we live together. How do political systems grow and change and evolve over time? You know, most national education systems prioritize teaching the history of the wars that your country happened to win. Certainly the case in my country, in the UK. And don't spend enough time on what happened between the wars. How do we learn to live together? How do these political systems actually flourish? That seems to me a vital thing for young people to be studying. And the third and final one for the head, which I think is so important, and our young people, by the way, are demanding this, is a much greater knowledge of our relationship with the planet and the steps that we need to take to protect our collective ecosystem. So those would be my 3 for the head. The 3 for the hand, the 3 essential skills. The first one is how do we learn? Because our young people will have to adapt. They'll have to move between different jobs, different kinds of life. And so they'll have to be constantly adapting in a way that my generation didn't have to do. So the process of learning and understanding of how you learn, how you adapt, becomes even more important. The second one, and I've been involved with this fantastic research, which is just coming out at the moment from the OECD, is about learning how to be more global. Now, this is something you do brilliantly already at UWC. It's a big part of the conversation that you have, part of the education that young people at UWC are getting. It's part of the ethos, really, the values of UWC. But around the world, most young people aren't learning those skills about how to be global. How do you develop the cultural antennae to adapt, to thrive in different environments, the curiosity about other cultures? And I really do recommend the research in how to teach and assess global competence, which the OECD are just releasing. The third and final skill for the hand is actually even more practical. And it's about managing your health and your wealth and your finances. Now, this doesn't mean how to become super rich or how to lose 4 stone in a week. But if you look at the books on sale in any airport departure terminal, you'll find that a lot of them are about how do we manage our stress, how do we manage our health, how do we manage our finances. And the reason that there are so many books out there on these issues, I'm trying to write one myself, is that we don't always learn those basic life skills in education. And so we send our young people out into the world without that essential knowledge about how to manage those practical aspects of their lives.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Tom. I mean, I think when we look back at what we didn't get to learn and what we did learn, how much of what we did learn actually empowered our lives, and where were the life skills that we needed, and there's nobody to actually teach you that. And it would be fantastic for that to be formalized into education across the world.
It's, as part of the project, I talked to so many extraordinary people and asked them, what do you wish you'd learned when you were 14, that you'd know when you were 14? And actually, very few of them said, I wish I'd known Pythagoras' theory, or how to translate this into Latin. It was much more about those practical life skills. People said, I wish I'd learned that it was okay to fail, that it was okay to take risks and to learn from those mistakes. I think a lot of education systems understand this, including at UWC, but it's not yet mainstream more widely in education. As part of that, by the way, as part of those life skills now, kids will have to learn much more about managing that relationship with technology. As we become not Homo sapiens, but Phono sapiens, they need to understand how multitasking is changing the way our brains function. I spent a lot of time with the extraordinary neuroscientist, Tara Swart, and she said, our memory and concentration centers in the brain are starting to shrink. We don't remember things because we don't need to anymore. And the crux of the problem in our society today is that education can't keep up. Now, this doesn't mean, by the way, that what we need to be teaching our kids is just how to code, how to compete with the machines in those sorts of areas. It's much more about how to interact, how to manage, how to live with the technology. The co-founder of Tech Will Save Us, which is a brilliant company that produces games really to help people interact with technology and understand technology, told me, my job as a parent is not to force our child down the world of coding, is to demonstrate all the ways that he or she can express themselves. It's much more about the creativity, learning through play, that is so important to the next generations. And then I mentioned the heart. So alongside the head and the hand, we need to also be passing on the best of the values that we've inherited. And actually we spent 2 years looking into this, and it turns out to be very simple. The 3 great values, great ways of being in the world that I believe we need to pass on are how to be curious, how to be brave, and how to be kind. And I'll come back to those in due course. So shall I give you a sense of where the blockages are to making this change happen, or do you want to go to another question, Anita?
Well, it's funny because this is what I love about synchronicity. A lot of the questions are literally following your train of thought, which I think is absolutely brilliant. How might we allow students in school opportunity to choose what are the best bits, using Tom's words, without negating the other aspects of the story?
I think that's a very important point, because I think parents understand this, teachers understand it, the students themselves clearly understand, as I come on to. And yet, because there isn't that sort of wider framework or wider conversation, we will end up drifting back to our comfort zone and to the pressures of teaching to the test and passing the exams and giving our young people what we see as a sort of entry card into society. When I learned to drive, I remembered saying to my driving teacher, why are we spending all our time doing parallel parking? Am I really going to do much parallel parking in life? He said, this isn't about learning to drive. I'm teaching you to pass the test here. Then you'll learn to drive once you pass the test. And I think we have that same attitude often to education. We say to our kids, look, you need to pass these tests because that's how you get started in the world, by having these qualifications. And then once you're out there, then you'll learn what you actually need to do, which isn't necessarily Pythagoras' theory. I'm sorry to be mean about Pythagoras. I do hope that the young people on the call are still concentrating in their maths lessons, but it's just an example.
It has not helped me at all, Tom.
Oh, well, I'm sure there'll be some in the chat who can show us genuinely that Pythagoras does help them in their day-to-day life. So I don't want to put you off Pythagoras.
Why you use that, because it's one of it's about concepts and theories versus actual form. And I think that it's really important, everything that you're speaking of, and parents and people on here on the Q&A are really alongside you, because I think that we've all had kind of enough of the way that it happened in the past. And also I think, although that we think that we need to teach the kids, I think the kids are teaching all of us too.
Yeah.
They are informing all of the choices that we need to make, and it's whether we want to stay open to absorb and
yeah.
receive.
Absolutely right. I mean, that was a big thing I learned through this project, was that actually we're talking a lot about what we teach the next generation. Actually, we need to learn these sorts of skills, including our relationship with technology. Kids often understand that relationship much better than we do as adults, however much we moan about them being on their phones. Every time I do, my kid points out, I've just sent 3 tweets in the last hour. So we need to manage, and we all can recognize that some world leaders could do with learning these skills around empathy and being kinder and more curious and so on. So what will make this happen, and what's stopping this happening at the moment? So the good news is that actually I've talked a lot about technology, but the digital economy will bring great opportunities to learn, really new opportunities to learn. And we're discovering this through the pandemic as we adapt to online learning. And our young people will have much more control over their own lives, including their education. Maybe the internet will then liberate our capacity to reason together as humans. I mean, how exciting is that? Young people, the billion coming online, will have more access to knowledge, not just than Einstein or Leonardo da Vinci. They'll have more access to knowledge than Steve Jobs. It's an extraordinary opportunity they'll have. So it's a much more significant moment in history than the printing press even, in removing the barriers to information and therefore to power, ultimately. Computers and the internet are replacing the textbooks. We can see that. The smartboard is replacing the blackboard, and a blockchain wallet will in time replace the exam certificate. Now, I was very struck, though, that when I went into the heart of Silicon Valley to look at how people there are educating their young people, the argument for more social, emotional learning is already won. If you go to these schools where the little Zuckerbergs and Musks are learning, there's not much, they're learning a relationship with tech, but the tech is it's almost a sideshow in the room. What they're really learning is problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, curiosity. Very, very striking, rather than passing classic exams. The bad news, though, is that education experience is available only to a small minority on the planet. So Gordon Brown, who's the UN envoy for education, told me, this is the great civil rights issue of our time. We're actually reproducing social and economic inequality at the moment. There's a new digital divide. Now, there are four constituencies, and this is where I may start disagreeing. People may start disagreeing. 4 constituencies which I think at the moment might be standing in the way of faster change. The first is actually the tech industry itself. Now, there are great people out there doing brilliant creative things with tech and education, and those will rise to the surface. But many people in the tech sector are investing more time retraining employees rather than thinking, how do we spread the benefits of education of the head, hand, and heart? So they're fixing the symptoms, but not the causes of the education crisis. And much of the tech disruption is all about new, shiny tech gadgets and not about empowering teachers who really do understand how classrooms work and how young people learn. So, people talk a lot about, let's have a self-driving classroom and so on. But we know from our own lives that that's not what learning is about. You need that human interaction with the teacher. We need more support for our teachers. It's not just about giving our kids a great new tablet. Second constituency, you've got tech. Second constituency, I'm afraid, coming from this background, national governments. Not all of them. Some like Singapore, Finland are really ahead of the game. But you only have to look at the way the average classroom has changed so little in the last 200 years compared to the average surgery to see how hard reform is. Even in countries traditionally seen as education leaders like the UK, our systems are often taking young people towards nationalism, rote learning and hierarchy rather than global citizenship, creative learning and networks. So we're leading them in the wrong direction from very early on. And at the moment, the fragility of the world system and the weakness of the UN means they can't step in to fill that gap. Third constituency, and again, an apology because it's where I am now, is higher education. Universities are full of brilliant individuals. I have 60 extraordinary professors in the quad just there doing amazing teaching and learning, passionate about education. But too many universities are very invested in the factory model, the industrial model of education, of league tables and exam results, and chasing the funding that comes as a result of that. Selection at universities is way too rooted in academic performance, the head, rather than the hand and the heart. And the tech is actually increasing the loads of academics rather than decreasing it. So we've got this industrial model that was produced for the 19th century, which has simply just been replicated in the 21st. Now, disruption of university is happening. We know that, by 2025, universities could lose 20-25% of the current market to online alternatives, to massive online courses, for example. People are already migrating in that direction, and the pandemic has increased the pace of that migration. So universities will have to adapt and remember that they are not buildings, but an idea. They're a place to bring together ideas and learning. Harvard education guru, Howard Gardner, I love this quote. He says that universities should not ask, in fact, this is for all of us really, don't ask how intelligent anyone is, but rather how are they intelligent? It's a great quote for how we think about education in the modern age. Final constituency, unwittingly holding back much of this change, and again, I apologize because I'm one of them, is some parents. Because however much we kind of understand the need for this change, and however much we care about giving our kids the right skills and the right values to go out into society, we'll often default back to thinking, we know all that, but actually we still have to focus on the exam result. At the end of the day, I'm doing this myself. I want my kids to get the best exam results they can. If you have a parent-teacher meeting where the head stands up and says, we're going to devote half the time now to curiosity and painting and creativity and learning through play, just wait for the hands of various parents, including me, to go up to say, well, hang on a second, we also want to pass the maths exam. So sometimes parents may get in the way of that change as well. Now, I've just got one sort of final thought, really, which is about then how we make the change. But do you want to stop for a question there? I'm conscious of the time.
Tom, what's actually happening is that you are literally answering all these questions without having even seen them.
Okay.
Because I just want to give you a few of them so that you understand, what is the collective, what the collective is saying. There are too many of the world's resources in the hands of too few. From your global perspective, where do you see any signs of hope that wealth and opportunity in education will be redistributed more equitably? We've got, how do we get exam boards to buy in the key concept that learning content is not key, transferable skills are, they seem slow to change. And then there's this, there's so many, there's just, there's one that just, this is from Monica, and it says, students are ready to move on. Yes, Monica. And I really liked this, which you were talking about just now in terms of parents buying into it and being the ones who sometimes might actually stand in the way, even if the progress or the progressive thought or the progressive ideas are being presented. And somebody did ask about fear and how do we actually, how do we conquer as parents and other parents fear of kind of the unknown and of all the changes? Because, I think what's happened and what you're talking about and how you're expressing it is so beautifully diverse, and it's also complex because we have to think about things at so many different levels. And this, what this time is proving to us is that there isn't a one size fits all. There isn't a one level that fits all, and never did. It served a purpose maybe at one particular point in time. Tom, I've been reminded that we've got to wrap you up and keep some fabulous questions for later. So I'm going to allow you to wrap, and then I'm going to have Parag on, and then we're going to come back.
Let's do that. Let's do that, and then we'll come back in the panel to some of those questions, which are brilliant. I mean, I think the best way to overcome the fear is to prepare. It is uncertain, but I hope that this sort of framework can help us through that. And actually, I want to finish really on, and it's Monica's point. So Monica's made it more eloquently and powerfully than I can. So who's going to make the change happen? It'll be the learners. It'll be young people who will drive this change. Going back to the example I gave you of Elsa hacking the back, I think that generation will find new ways to equip themselves with the right knowledge, skills, and character. So I ask students on every continent to help me hack the curriculum, to come up with a course that would teach them what they currently feel they're missing. And these are the sorts of things that they asked to learn more about. They wanted more creativity, they wanted more curiosity, they wanted more emotional skills. The good news is that because the world is becoming less top-down, less formal, less managerial, because power is shifting to networks and peer-to-peer contacts, those individuals can drive that change. Think of, an Airbnb of education driven by young people, where they drive knowledge and learning towards these new survival skills. We grew up playing Tetris, my generation. The Tetris, the blocks come down and you fit them all in. Young people have grown up playing Minecraft. It's a bit confused. It's much more chaotic out there, but you build things together. And I think young people will find a way to build these education systems together. Socrates, we go right back. I talked about traditional learning at Oxford. We go back even further. Education is not the filling of a vessel, but the kindling of a flame. So we face technological, environmental change at a pace we can't understand or control at the moment. We'll have to be brave enough to master technology rather than be mastered by it. We'll have to be kind enough to reduce the inequality I spoke about rather than widening it. And we'll have to be curious enough to find new ways to live and organize ourselves. That means we need the knowledge we've built up over millennia, but these new skills and character, maybe they were with us all along, to adapt and thrive and learn and create and coexist as global citizens. That's what I hope my kids learn. More importantly, I hope it's what the next Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, or Bill Gates learns. And maybe, if we get that right, maybe Jamal in that refugee camp in Beirut, in Lebanon, gets his moonshot too. Back to you, Anita.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much for this really clear direction, this provocation that you've presented to us. I just want to add that I love to hear an educator and a person of the world speak at so many different and to so many different things, and pull that all together, and to recognize that in order for change to happen, everybody needs to have agency. And the big change that has happened, that has brought that to the front in the last 9 to 10 months, is that everybody does have something to say, and it is valuable, and we need to take that into consideration and not approach education as a top-down, we can't do it anymore. Not if we're going to be able to not just survive, but thrive in the future. Tom, thank you so very much. I have like a million questions for you, and I'm going to keep them for the Q&A, because I think it's going to make it just an even richer Q&A. And I just also want to tell you that participants did not drop. In fact, they increased by 2 whole people. So please be proud of yourself. Thank you very much, Tom.
Great.
All right. I am going to, thank you again. I'm going to introduce Parag next. And of course, as I said, we're going to have a chance to explore the Q&A. And if you've been watching, thank you very much for staying with us. Please also keep some of your questions for later on in our panel discussion, where we will be taking from the Q&A what we haven't discussed, as well as the additional questions as well. So thank you. Okay, I'd like to hand over to our next keynote speaker, but before I do, I will introduce him, Parag Khanna. Parag is founder and managing partner of FutureMap, a data and scenario-based strategic advisory firm that specializes in global business consultancy. He is also a seasoned author of 6 best-selling books. His latest, released in 2019, is titled The Future is Asian: Commerce, Conflict and Culture in the 21st Century. I had the opportunity to interview him on it, and it's a fantastic book. In it, he explores what he refers to as global Asianization, the rise of Asia's major markets and their combined impact on the global economy, society, and governance around the world. Parag has been an advisor to the US National Intelligence Council's Global Trends 2030 program. He was a senior research fellow in the Center on Asia and Globalization at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS, National University of Singapore, for 6 years. This post in Singapore followed 9 years as a senior research fellow at the New America Foundation. He holds a PhD in international relations from the London School of Economics, has spent time working at the World Economic Forum, and was a senior geopolitical advisor to the US Special Operations Forces on Iraq and Afghanistan for a year. He has been named one of Esquire's 75 most influential people of the 21st century, featured in Wired Magazine's Smart List. He's a regular contributor to CNN, BBC, CNBC, Al Jazeera, and other media outlets. His 4 TED Talks have been viewed combined 3 million times. He is also a parent in the UWCSEA East community, and I am sure he will challenge us, as he always does, with his thinking on the globally connected landscape facing our workforce of the future, who just happen to be students today. Parag, It's all yours.
Anita, thank you so much for that very generous introduction. I'm glad you mentioned, of course, the most important qualification of all, being a UWC dad, about 7 years worth now. So it's certainly a family affair. And I'm delighted to be part of this series again. Kishore Mahbubani is such a great patron of events and discourse like this. Unfortunately, we're not physically in the library this time, but it's great to see such a large number. I don't think that 232 people would fit in the library at the moment, certainly not under social distancing guidelines.
Certainly, we have a bigger audience even, so I think it's even more impressive, and the ability for us to share so much wider, I think, is fantastic. So,
and obviously a great honor and privilege to be following Tom, who I've long admired, and you can tell his the way he writes, the way he speaks is also the way he is, and that's an important attribute of both a person and a diplomat. So I can only wholeheartedly endorse everything he just said. And unfortunately, I'm going to take things in a completely different but totally complementary direction, a different set of more macro ideas and sort of just visuals, maps, data, kind of showing the landscape of the world that young people are heading into. So let me go ahead and share my screen so we can jump right into that. And I'll zip through this because I know that there's so many pending questions from Tom's session that we want to get to. So let me go ahead. I call this Have Skills, Will Travel. If I could sort of, go back to the last 25 years of my life, I'm not sure I have skills, but I've certainly traveled a fair bit. And I found that travel itself has been a methodology for me. And it's in a way, as Tom was saying, hard skills, soft skills, skills we test for versus skills you really need. One thing I can say with confidence is that if I had to sacrifice any skills I may have acquired, the one I would always retain is the ability to travel and to use that as a way of learning. I don't think I could possibly learn more any other way than through being on the ground. So let's talk about the where question for a couple of reasons. We are in lockdown. Wherever you may be in the world, if you're in North America, you're going to be there in a long time. If you're in Europe, probably a long time. Asia too. So we're drifting. I call this continental drift. It's not just the pandemic, because let's assume there's a vaccine tomorrow. The truth is, though, that the world has been regionalizing in terms of centers of gravity. There's a North American political and economic system, a European one and an Asian one. And the Asian one is the biggest and the most complicated by far. It's also the most populous. So I don't just mean size in terms of geography, I mean in terms of demographics. So here's something very significant. It's not only that you have 4.5 billion people in this circle, right? Roughly 4-ish billion people in this spotlight, which is the majority of the human population. It's that this will always be true. So whatever age you are today, but especially if you're young, I want you to remember this, fun or not so fun fact. Mankind is going through the kind of inflection point that we probably never thought would happen. And in the, say, 100,000+ years of history that we can trace of mankind, this moment is literally unique in that 100,000-year history, which is the following. You are living through a plateau in the human population and likely its decline. Not decline to zero, just that it will reach a peak of roughly perhaps 9.2-ish billion people in the next 15 to 20 years, and then likely decline. If you are Generation Z, which is to say a sort of late teen, you are the last large generation in history, because millennials and Gen Alpha, today's young children, are not having as many offspring. So we are in many ways voluntarily and involuntarily, because of things like the pandemic, bringing about a sort of decline in our own population size. That does tie together with economics and of course with environmental issues. But be that as it may, how it links to this slide is that, again, not only is Asia the center of the world population now, it is going to be for pretty much the rest of our lives or our time on this planet. So it's very important we're actually here in Asia, those of us who are, at a very, very propitious, interesting, dynamic moment in history. This is what I mentioned about the generational change. Millennials took over from Generation X. as a share of as the largest demographic cohort in the world. They were followed by Generation Z, and then Generation Alpha, and that's pretty much it. The lifespan of Generation Alpha will take us towards the end of the century, and based on present fertility rates, it's going to the population is going to be shrinking at that point back towards where it is now, or potentially even lower. So what does that mean for the world as a whole, not just Asia? Well, in terms of how we generate or think about either our national or global economic activity and growth, not growth for the sake of itself, but growth as something that has been necessary in many ways to modernize our societies. Well, a lot of it has come just from population growth and from pushing people into cities. So even absent technology, economies have been able to grow on the basis of just having larger populations and moving them into cities where they have higher wages. But now we're moving into a world where 60–70% of the population already lives in cities, and we are in a way tapping out the number of young people moving through the system. Older people don't spend as much, and we have this population decline. So we have to think really hard about optimizing the value, the contribution of each person in the world, because we are it, so to speak. There isn't a next and a next and a next larger and larger generation to take over from us. And that's the kind of, that's a philosophical, but a factual and a moral issue that we need to think about. How do we make the most of every person that is left, if you will, in the human population today and tomorrow? And there isn't a an answer off the shelf for that. It's something that we should spend a lot of time thinking about in a holistic way. Let me just get back again to Asia as an area of tremendous opportunity to answer that question. When a lot of people talk about Asia, they talk about Asia aging because they think about Japan, South Korea, coastal Chinese cities. But Asia, of course, also has more young people than the rest of the world put together. And a lot of those young people are concentrated here in the countries in orange. So, in the last 75 years, Japan was the first economy to really lift off or catapult Asia's rise in the post-war decades of the 50s and 60s. Then came the countries in yellow, the tiger economies, which is South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and of course, everyone knows that little yellow dot there at the tip of Malaysia. It's the red dot, Singapore. The third wave was China itself, right, which in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s really took off and has now become the world's largest economy. Now you have the fourth wave. So focus on these countries in orange, from Pakistan through India and all of Southeast Asia. That right there is 2.5 billion mostly young people. That's very significant. Whereas, again, China is aging, Japan is aging. India's median age is 12 years younger than China's is. And this is where there is such a huge amount of human potential. Now, if we take just Southeast Asia, by the way, if the 700 million people of Southeast Asia, where we live right now, many of us, if it were a country, right, it's a population larger than the European Union, but if it were a single country, it would be the single most unequal country in the world. Think about the wealth gap between the people of Brunei and Singapore versus the population of Myanmar or Papua New Guinea. That is a roughly 60-to-1 income gap on a per capita basis, right? So a far higher income gap than any other part of the world, including Africa, because statistically Africa doesn't have as many billionaires as Asia does. So right here in our own region, we have this enormous concentration of young people, the largest cohort of young people on the planet Earth. And we have this incredible inequality, and we have to think about this as a microcosm, therefore, of the global challenge of harnessing humanity. What do we do with all of the young people? Now, this is also a region of great opportunity because of what I'm showing you on this slide. So you don't have to, hopefully, you don't have to know advanced econometrics for this. I'll make it very simple for you. I call this slide Adopt a Country. What do I mean? Well, in the upper right, you have countries like Singapore and South Korea and Japan. What do they have in common? They're aging, full of elderly people, they're rich, and they're highly sophisticated economies. They have a high, what's called ECI value. Further down in the middle, you have countries clustered like India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and so forth. And these are countries that are much younger in terms of their median age, but their economies are not particularly advanced. So I call this slide Adopt a Country because historically what happens is as countries get rich and older and more complex with their economies, they start to offshore their supply chains and their investment into these developing countries like right here in Southeast Asia and South Asia. And that process is going on right now. It's creating a lot of jobs in the region. It's bringing supply chains here. It's bringing technology, and it's helping these countries get much more connected to the global economy. It's creating, it's raising productivity, raising wages, and so forth. You can, whether people are making Samsung phones or whether they're coding for Singapore-based software companies or those from Taiwan or working for Facebook, Google, all of that is part of this story that makes Southeast Asia so interesting as these young populations get jobs, modernize, and move up the value chain. And you're not seeing this process happening this fast anywhere on Earth right now. So it's a really special moment. But you have to know where to go. You have to know what skills to have. You don't have to have been born and raised here to be working here. This is a region where people are coming, of course, from all over the world, whether expats or otherwise, to be part of the story. So young people who are either growing up here or coming here, either way, in a region that has a dozen countries, you don't necessarily know where you're going to be working, what you're going to be doing. You might be hustling from gig to gig. You may be working for several companies at the same time in a portfolio. I'll just throw in a little anecdote right now. Because of remote work, what we're seeing is that skilled knowledge workers in their 20s are able to take 2 or 3 jobs at the same time because their employer doesn't really know what they're doing anymore because they're not in the office. Now, at the same time as you have, widespread unemployment around the world among millennials and Generation Z, particularly in the West, you also find that at the top level, those that are considered knowledge workers with technology skills are literally able to do 3 jobs at once and are doubling or tripling their incomes. This is not about money. It's about, again, having a certain skill set that you can do physically somewhere, remotely somewhere, and be, again, portable. Have skills, will travel. Travel physically, travel digitally. My hero, recently deceased, is the great futurist Alvin Toffler, one of my heroes. And he had this great line, which is subsequently become very famous and oft-cited. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And you've probably seen this quote. I think it's truly timeless. What I've compiled here for you, by now you've probably had a scan of this slide, from the many, many different surveys and studies that talk about, what skills to have, what 21st century, skills do people need. Those I've listed on the right. On the bottom left, some of the areas of fastest job creation. A lot of these are IB subjects, though I'm guessing that social network gaming is not something that they teach in the IB or necessarily even encourage. But the skills on the right do dovetail nicely with what Tom was saying earlier in terms of what actually I have called sort of a mix of EQ and TQ. Some years ago, my wife Aisha and I were writing a book together, what we called hybrid reality. But in that, we coined this phrase TQ, technology quotient. We found that there's a lot of criticism about the idea of IQ. EQ has been an important complement to that, but is also itself insufficient. And none of these are not mutually exclusive. But TQ, of course, is technology quotient, understanding how you can apply this rapid diffusion and emergence of technologies to your life, to your social environment, of course, in the professional domain as well. I don't want to go on too long. I just want to broaden the aperture for a moment, beyond just Southeast Asia, to look again at what's happening in Asia as a whole. This map is really showing you what will happen as the sort of full Belt and Road Eurasian infrastructure it gets built out over time. And just remember, again, in this rectangle are 5 billion people, right? The majority of the human population lives right here in this rectangle. For those who aren't in IB geography, right down there at the bottom again is Singapore. But all of these lines of connectivity, right? Wherever you see over the last, roughly 2,000 to 3,000 years, wherever you see infrastructure, could be a road, railway, now electricity cables or internet cables, wherever you see infrastructure get laid down, that's where young people go. That's where people are flocking. Young people want to live in cities. They want to congeal. They want to work in the services economies and so forth. And I'm seeing this incredible youthful energy when I travel in Central Asia and these other and around Southeast Asia. So following that story of young people on the move, urbanizing, and doing productive things to be part of the new nation building is, I think, one of the most exciting things about being young today. So where are people moving? This is just a slide for people to remember or save if you like. Get a sense of just how, if you think about the stock of roughly, more than 200 million people who live outside their countries of origin and the movements within and between regions of the world. We had reached on the eve of the pandemic an incredible high point. More than 250 million people living outside their country of origin, 1.5 billion cross-border travelers, business travelers and tourists, and then it all stopped. Right, December 2019 was an all-time high in human history, and now we're back at zero. So what comes next, right? Which regions are going to reconnect with their traditional centers of population exchanges, or what new places may we in fact have to go? And I'll start to wrap up at this point, which is bringing in the climate change factor. Because the other thing that is so unique about this moment in history that we are living through now is not just the demographic plateau that we're reaching, but obviously the potentially cataclysmic impact, or certainly the volatility that climate change brings. So I've tried to contextualize climate change into as broader analysis of why people move at all. Why do you ever leave home, the place where you were born? And it comes down to 6 reasons, really. Demographic imbalances, so young people moving to aging countries to work there. Political upheaval, unrest, civil wars and conflicts that drive refugees. Economic crises, of course, as well, such as we've had in 2008. Technological automation. People are, sort of had their jobs outsourced to robots and moved to places where there's work. Now climate change and of course the pandemic as well, together people wanting to leave so-called red zones and move to green zones or blue zones, places that are healthier. So what are we looking for? I've listed the kind of, sort of the virtues of a stable patch in the world, whether it's a city, province, or country, right? Having basically this kind of, again, a circular economy, being ecologically sustainable, having adequate health care, affordable housing, jobs, and being sort of migrant friendly. And we need to make sure that we're building more places like this in the world and think very hard in a future kind of forecasting way about where they're going to be, because all of us are price takers is the term formally. We're all victims of climate change, and we are going to have to think about where we physically relocate as a result of that. But wherever we go, whatever we build, we should be building sustainable and inclusive communities. And that is a generational project. That's something that if you're a millennial, Gen Z, Gen Alpha today, you'll be spending your lifetime on this issue. Do you have the skills that it will take to reorganize humanity? Because nothing less than that is what is the challenge that lies ahead for our generation. So I'm going to stop right there. Thank you very much, Anita.
Parag, thank you for bringing us down to earth. But this is where we need to sort of get into the real meat of this. With Tom, we've got this very expansive, the kaleidoscope, and then we're getting into these points in the kaleidoscope with you. So it's just remarkable to be able to sit here and just listen to both of these. It's like the two sides of the brain, or the head and the heart working at the same time in this discussion. And I love it. And I love that we're going to actually have a panel discussion after this. We have so many questions, but I need to actually give everybody a 5-minute break. But I just want to say thank you so much, Parag. You know, you're always not just eloquent, but you get to that point so very quickly, and you make us all feel, at least for me and the 230 people who are all watching, that the urgency of how to make these decisions together with the hand over the heart and using the head as well. So I thank you and I commend you for a great, for a great presentation and a good setup for a wonderful discussion later on. Thank you so much. Thank you. Whew, okay, so I hope everybody is feeling as sort of whirlwindy as I am, because my brain, both sides of my head are just going boom, boom, boom. And of course, that's the whole point of these discussions, that we start getting real content for action and start thinking about how we're really going to change things up. I'm going to give everybody a 5-minute break right now, because that's where we're at. So grab a drink, grab some water, and I'll see you guys back here. It's now 7:50, and I think that I have permission to ask you guys to come back in 7:55. 7:50. If I could get everybody back here at 7:55, and then we will get into our panel discussion. So far, you have listened to Tom Fletcher and Parag Khanna, and if you are about to join us only now, you're about to come into a great panel discussion. So hold on for 5 minutes, and we'll all be back. Thank you. And we're back, everybody. And of course, you've caught me while I'm scrolling through, because I've got so many questions that need answering, and I can't quite wait to get to the panel. And of course, I'm the one on mute. No, I'm not on mute. I'm not on mute. Can you guys hear me? Say something. Someone say something to me. Oh, great. Wonderful. All right. I'm not on mute. This is what has to happen. You can all hear me. I'm back. Obviously, those 5 minutes, just, you know, I lost the plot in 5 minutes. I hope you guys have been having a really, really great time with us, and that you've really been inspired by the conversations, the presentations that have come before. And now, of course, we're into a panel discussion. We have so many great questions from all of you. Please keep them coming, because that's really what this panel discussion is going to be about. We're going to go straight into your questions. But before I do that, I would like to introduce you to my third panel member. We are, of course, going to check the poll results as well. Now that you have heard from Tom and Parag, I wonder if your views have shifted from before. And I think if we can bring those, are we able to bring those poll results up? Fantastic. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to invite Tom, Parag, and Musimbi to join me back on screen. There, we've got him. Hi, everybody. You can see the poll results. Fantastic. And of course, what we have here is focus given to values and character development as the #1 thing that needs to transform, so that students are prepared for the future. And before we actually get into it, I would like to introduce you to our third panelist, Dr. Musimbi Kanyoro. Musimbi currently serves as chair of the board of UWC International, the educational movement which UWCSEA is a part of. She is also a board member of CARE International and of the UN Global Compact. She was president and CEO of Global Fund for Women from 2011 to 2019. And in that time, she also spent 4 years with the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, managing a 30 million grant-making portfolio as the Director of Population and Reproductive Health. This portfolio spread across the USA, Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. During 20 years leading international NGOs in Geneva, Switzerland, she made history as the first non-white CEO in the 150-year history of the world YWCAs. While there, she transformed the organization, bringing the urgent topics of the 21st century to their agenda. This included a focus on innovation by young women, embracing technology and aligning with solutions for pressing health and environmental concerns. Musimbi has recently moved off the World Bank Gender Advisory Board and has and has previously served on the boards of the UN entities, international NGOs, and a number of academic institutions. In 2017, Musimbi was named on the Global 40 over 40, a list of women who are reinventing, disrupting, and making an impact. In 2018, Apolitical honored her on their list of the 100 most influential people in gender policy. In 2019, Musimbi Kanyoro was listed as one of the 9 people who fought for the planet alongside Bill Gates, Ban Ki-moon, and Michael Bloomberg. The same year, Musimbi voluntarily terminated her term of service as president and CEO of the Global Fund for Women in order to move back to her home country, Kenya. She is now based in Nairobi, from where she is engaged both locally and internationally, mostly in education, gender, and climate change activities. Welcome, Musimbi.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you here. Musimbi, you've seen the poll and you've seen the result of the poll. Are you surprised?
Yes, I should be surprised.
Musimbi did tell us that we might have some Wi-Fi issues. And she's back. Okay, so the focus is for values and character development. That is the result of the poll. Did that surprise you?
Yes, I should be surprised because I was expecting that lots of people would be speaking about other issues that were mentioned, but at the same time, it very much resonates with what I am thinking and what I hope I will be able to contribute as we begin our panel work.
That's fantastic, Musimbi. Yeah, I was actually really happy to see the result of the poll because I was kind of hoping it would go in that direction. So maybe I'm just a real optimist, but I love that because I think that's part of what both Tom and Parag were talking about. You know, Tom was talking about the development of those characteristics and Parag was talking about where you could go in this world to bring all those characteristics. So I think we're going to have a really great panel discussion. So welcome. So guys, Tom, you need to unmute.
Here goes.
Fantastic. We always have one person, Tom, always. And that person is you today. It was me apparently earlier. Okay, we got great questions. And I don't know if you guys have seen all of them, but I really just want to go through them and use that as our panel discussion because these are urgent questions from people across the world. And the first one I want to talk about is from Monica Shesta. And she talks about how can we prevent the polarization of people's opportunities due to educational inequalities. And this is something all 3 of you could answer, but whoever gets in there first. The pandemic has made this inequality larger in communities where access to internet and technology have been the factor, whether you receive education or not. Musimbi, would you like to answer that first?
All right, let me begin. I want to begin, first of all, I want to appreciate so much both what Tom and Parag said. A lot of things that were said resonated with me. And there were also quite a lot that I would want to interact with to test out the stress test of those issues. And one which is related to the question that you have asked is, Tom said why we should be concentrating a lot in things which we have in common rather than things which divide us. The question that has been asked, though, is really saying to us, what about those things that divide us? I think in the world in which we live today, if we don't pay strong attention to those things that we don't share in common as well, it's going to be very important. For example, yes, we can say the pandemic has shown us that we can have something that impacts every part of the world, every country of the world, except Antarctica, where we understand that doesn't have the pandemic. And yet, what this pandemic has done is to show us that even within countries or within small populations, the economic difference matters. The economic difference matters. And it matters at many levels. Right now in the education field, the connection to the education is very much by learning externally through digital learning. So many people cannot access that. And for children who are beginning their education early, we fear that they may be quite behind in their learning processes. And then there's the difference that of one of the things that also was mentioned by Tom that, and others, is that we should not be so much set up into idealizing, using my own words, technology. And yet, at the same time, the other part of this is that technology is what is keeping us connected right now. And I think both the hardware and the software needs are so high that an education that we put into place today cannot forget to emphasize the education on the use of technology, the design of the right technology, and then the access to technology in every part of the world if we are going at all to work on issues of peace and development and togetherness. Because if we don't, then we continue to create a world in which the divide is so large, and our ability to bring the kind of peace that we want to see happen in the world will not happen. And that's why I'm really committed to education that is being propagated at the UWC level. Because when we bring students together at the UWC, we know that we are bringing them together for not just getting the skills and the subjects, but a lot of time is what is embodied in their being human. Because I think to solve any of the issues that we have, we first have to create humans that have respect for each other. And when you have a respect for someone, you see them. And when you see them in what are they missing at the table for the decision making? Do they have what it takes to be at that table? Can they also contribute at that table what it is that they specialize in? We have a lot of urbanization going on, as Parag managed to let us see. But we also know that if we're going to sustain all of these populations, and Parag, you and I work in the same area, sometimes in the population area, we really have to be able to think about food sustainability. How are these people going to be fed? So in the subjects that you mentioned that are important for job markets, I missed strongly the subjects that make the students learn how to just work with the people, the human related subjects that build character, that are able to build empathy, ethical behavior, empowerment, efficiency, gender equality. For me, these subjects will make the base of what true learning and true education is. And I want to stop there so that others will be able to contribute to the same question.
Thank you very much, Musimbi. I just want to check in with Tom and Parag if there's something that you'd like to say as well and to discuss with Musimbi at this point, just really quickly.
Yeah, with great pleasure, and thank you, Musimbi, and thank you, Parag. I mean, it's been a fascinating conversation. I think, and if this is the same Monica that asked the earlier question, she's my top question asker of the day. It's another great question. I didn't vote for the. This may be surprising. I didn't vote for the one that won the poll. I actually voted for access, because I do worry that's an even greater challenge. I worry that we may get some of this stuff right, but we'll find that we're building amazing schools, extraordinary schools, but behind bigger and bigger walls. And the great dividing line of the 21st century is between people who believe that the answer to all the challenges that Parag described is coexistence and living together, and the people who believe that the answer is actually just a bigger wall. So I think we have to be really careful to ensure that this opportunity that we're talking about is available to everyone. So 3 things we can do. One is, I do believe that spreading connectivity is part of the answer, giving people access to the internet. We can spread more high quality, free, accessible content to poorer communities. Every top school in the world has been producing fantastic online platforms, online learning over the year. Making those available to more people really helps, and we can do much more to support teachers in more vulnerable communities. 3 things that we shouldn't do are to treat poorer communities as a market, simply an educational market for stuff that we want to flog, to treat them as a lab where we just go and experiment before then reproducing what we're trying out in richer communities, or to treat them as an ego trip that we just go to once a year and hand out free tablets and then disappear again. This calls for a much more sustained collective approach.
Tom, I absolutely agree with you. And what you're talking about is consciousness. And I think that's really what we have experienced over this time, is a raising of the levels of consciousness. And I agree absolutely with Musimbi as well, is that it's not so much about what binds us together only, because that can just paint us a rainbow picture only, you know, and the positivity there isn't a side to it. And we're actually more divided than we ever have been. And we need these two sides to really come together. Parag, there are a couple of questions for you that actually came at the end of your presentation, which I really want to get to. And this was really, I thought this was a really great question from Erjan, Juan Erjan. Parag, education in Asia thus far seems to be top-down, knowledge-driven, seemingly contrary to what Tom was talking about. Given the educational landscape here, is Asia still the future?
It's a great question. Well, I mean, logically speaking, Asia wouldn't have become what it is today if it weren't for some virtues of its educational system. So I think we have to take that into account. You know, I think that there's also a lot of generalizations, relatively pejorative from the standpoint of, you know, a very liberal, open-ended, creativity-based kind of curriculum that we're accustomed to in the UWC environment, about sort of, you know, Asian education, you know, whether it is Singapore math and the kind of, you know, rigid testing that we see in South Korea, Japan, you know, China. On the one hand, I would say, again, there are, you know, basic skills that are emphasized, basic intellectual knowledge skills around mathematics. You know, could it be done differently? Of course it could, but it is important to have those skills. When you look at countries where you have, you know, innumeracy, you know, basic innumeracy, you would rather that, you know, children get a rigorous math education than, you know, the extreme alternative. So perhaps there's a happy medium, and each society, especially progressive places, when it comes to education, you know, like Singapore itself, are trying to modify and revise the curriculum. Somewhere, you know, I mean, I now on this side of the experience look at our young children, and I certainly pity those who have to sit for long standardized tests, you know, for 3, 4, 5 hours. It would be obviously much better if we had problem-based, you know, project-based learning, problem solving as a way of demonstrating the aptitude acquired in subjects, you know, like math. And again, I think there is a happy medium that we're converging towards. We can see that PISA and other entities are trying to find ways to test for that, and so forth. So, you know, we'll get there eventually, and kind of, you know, sort of come to a consensus around critical thinking and problem solving, you know, is the right way to measure whatever the subject is that we're teaching children. So, you know, if Asia can adapt to that set of new challenges that will help keep its own children ahead of the automation curve and algorithms and AI, then no question, you know, Asia will continue to prosper.
Fantastic. I have so many questions going in. I don't even know which ones to choose, guys. There are just so many because everyone is fired up, and I love that. But I'm going to go to this because I need to pass this on to Musimbi. It's from Shaleen Agarwal, and she said, this isn't a question, but a jumbo to Musimbi from a fellow Kenyan and a parent at UWCSEA. So proud and happy to see you.
I'm delighted, and I answered Jambo. I wanted to contribute just a line to Parag. One of the things that I think I was looking to hear from you is where else can Asia learn? In your presentation, you mainly mentioned countries which seemed to matter from the theory you had, and you said, oh, regions, Europe and America. And I think this continued learning where we have a learning that only goes from north to the south in the way in which Asia learns from Europe and America, and never a mention of other spaces. And I want to put a word to say, there is a lot in the things that we are going through where we can learn across. For example, if we really want to learn something about climate change, we have to look at the small island states. And the small island states both in the Pacific and in the Caribbean, because there we see islands disappearing. And we see people of those islands who have really experienced a certain kind of climate change, that if we're not able to bring that to the learning of every continent, every region, we're missing something out of it. The end of last year, I had the opportunity to spend 6 weeks with women scientists, and we were doing a study in the Antarctic. And there we saw, as we stayed day in looking at what happens in our world, we really saw that the leadership that we are going to need to change the world is not going to come from one place or from one region, but it's going to come across. When many people, including economists, speak about the world, they tend to think that the world could live without Africa. And I want to say that that's not possible. And we shouldn't be having an education system anywhere in the world that does not include Africa, because there are a lot of things that are happening in the world today to which the learning of the religions to solve those things really depends on Africa. For example, we've had many pandemics, we've had droughts, we've had refugees, etc., to which not only Africa has participated, but people from all over the world, diplomats, development workers, etc. Is the knowledge that people have gone by working in Africa completely useless to the world? Are those problems completely, both the problems and the solutions that have been rendered to that continent, completely of no use to the rest of the world? So I think when we mention education and mention the continents of the world, we should try to see how this circular education includes various things from various places, and not divide the world by the economic prosperity or the political knowledge of those countries, because I think that's passé and it's gone. And I hope that post-pandemic, we're going to learn a lot more things about how and what we mean when we say we are one world, we are one village, because we are not behaving like that. And the third part of this is that I think in the subjects that we taught, for many years, we taught the world, develop, build high, consume more, eat artificial food. Some of the parts of the world, including Africa, but many other parts, especially within indigenous communities, they didn't quite get there. And that's why often they are left out as developing. But today, when we think about nutrition and health, we say, go natural. Why aren't we able now to influence the learning in schools to say, by the way, we all went too far, and now we have to go to indigenous communities of the world to learn what good nutrition looks like, what good protection of the environment looks like, what living simple life without too much consumption looks like. That for me is education and learning that we need to do to change the paradigms and to change the nature of the conversations so that the world can go into the future, a different world from what where we are coming from, if we really want to be futuristic in education.
Absolutely well said, Musimbi. Parag, what would you like to add?
I think she's absolutely right, especially this last point. Let me just re-emphasize or reiterate around the knowledge of indigenous societies when it comes to areas like nutrition, and really having kind of the sixth sense that we have lost in many modern societies in terms of being in touch with nature and understanding that balance. And this is absolutely critical because we have found, for example, with the pandemic, you remember back in February, March, suddenly because of the lockdowns, suddenly the skies cleared in places, and you heard people say, well, perhaps this is the solution to climate change. But of course, modern societies went back to their old ways very, very quickly, and didn't learn the lessons, didn't internalize them, didn't change policies, not able to do that. The heavy machinery of modernity changes very, very slowly. And meanwhile, quite a few traditional, we would call economically, quote unquote, lesser developed societies have managed the pandemic far better, despite large population sizes, because of maybe just an innate sense of our relationship with nature. And I think that's just extremely important. So I applaud that point, and I really want to echo it.
Guys, I want to ask you, where is it all supposed to start? We've talked about the ideas, we've talked about what's going to or needs to change. Where does the shift actually need to begin? Is this with higher education institutes? Is this at the primary and secondary school level? Is it within communities? Tom, would you like to answer?
Sure. I think it's about coalitions. As I say, it won't come from universities or from governments alone. It won't come even from the tech leaders either. We're all going to have to work at this together. But I think the Oxford professor who's battling to get space on the curriculum for a global view of history can then take a lot of encouragement and heart from the art teacher who's battling to show that mastering creativity is not just about an after-school club, but actually helps you achieve everything you want to academically. I think that the head teacher who's convincing teachers and parents that mindfulness helps academic success can also take heart from the tech entrepreneur who's testing how play develops brain power, the business leader who's frustrated that his employees aren't equipped with the right skills to solve problems and think critically, can take heart from a YouTube campaigner who's making popular videos about why education has to change. UN official who's exhausted by trying to make it easier for refugees to learn can take heart from students demanding that they learn global citizenship, global competence. So, I think all those pieces have to move together, but we have to build these coalitions between the different pioneers in all those different spaces that become load-bearing. That's how change has always happened.
This is a question for Parag, and it kind of bridges to what Tom's spoken about, what Musimbi's spoken about. This question says, when Parag says we will get there eventually, it doesn't help my daughter and other students who are suffering under systems that can damage mental health and well-being right now. We know so much about optimal learning conditions. So at what point are we negligent for not making changes now?
Well, here actually it is fairly easy to point the blame, and I'll go back and cite what Tom said earlier. It's the parents, right? The children know what their, sort of psychological tipping point is, and teachers, to some degree, of course, we can't generalize about parents or teachers per se, but teachers know that it's time for change, and I hear very often that administrators and faculty are trying to again change the system, make it more open-ended and so forth. But the parents are the ones who still who impose, and this is exactly what Tom said almost verbatim, impose an older generation's experiences and biases and modes of learning onto their children. And something that comes up in our house all the time with two young kids, it's sort of what aspects of our experience from our life at that age are worth keeping, in today's world, today's children. And as parents, we actually have to ask ourselves that question about 50 times a day. When you tell your child to do something a certain way, ask yourself if indeed the way that you're telling them to do it is something that's just from your experience from decades ago, or is it actually the right way for today? And I wish that I think we need a broader conversation around how parents think about these things. It's a difficult dynamic. Just here in Singapore and perhaps similar in other countries, there's ministries of education, the school leadership, the parents, the students, teachers. There's many constituencies involved in this, and but I do think the parents have more leverage. But at the moment, it seems to be more to inhibit change than to promote it.
Okay, we don't have a lot of time left. Musimbi, I do want to hear what you have to say, but I just want to get a couple of these sort of impactful, urgent questions in. Is it a time for schools to be bold or conservative? If it's bold, what does that look like for national, international schools and universities? Or can we point to examples of it already happening? Tom, if you would take that question first, followed by Musimbi and then Parag. So real quick ones. Is it a time for schools to be bold or conservative?
Bold.
Okay. Musimbi?
Very bold.
Parag?
Say how or just enough?
No question. And let me just add, to be cheeky, competition, right? Tom mentioned the digital and the threat, the structural threat. That's not something that is coming from me personally or something like that. It is the technological environment. It is the evolution of our civilization right now. It's going to be a very competitive learning environment. So if you're not bold, you are going to lose out.
I have one last question, and it's to Tom. You mentioned that for previous industrial revolutions, like the printing press, we had time to evolve, but that the pace of change is such now that evolution is not an option. Do you believe, therefore, that only revolution is an option now in education?
I think that some of the things we're talking about will be quite revolutionary, but education systems aren't naturally well fitted to revolution. So it wasn't quite saying that we can't evolve, just that we will have to evolve much more quickly than in the past. So really, I mean, the final thought I'd want to share actually comes back to Musimbi's point about learning from all different directions, and in particular, in this case, learning from the South and from Africa. I keep this book of advice that I get from world leaders for my son, which I'm going to give him on his 14th birthday. And it's got advice from presidents and I mean, all sorts of interesting people, sports people and so on. The best piece of advice in here for a 14-year-old, or indeed from anyone, comes from Nelson Mandela. And he wrote, Madiba wrote, worry less about what goes on your CV when you leave school and worry more about what people will say about you at the end of your life. And I think that's a pretty good manifesto for the future education.
Absolutely. Musimbi, would you also answer that question for us as well? Do you believe that only revolution is an option now in education? And we can't quite see you, so I think there's something covering your screen. There you are. So do you believe that it's only revolution that is it only revolution now?
No, I don't think it's only revolution. I think it's revolution, but I think the word I would use more is transformation, which will both include some revolution, but also a lot of innovation that is needed. And a risk-taking, a kind of risk-taking that allows us to use both new things, but also things that are available. For example, an earlier question that you asked, at what point do we start to teach? Is it higher education or lower education? For me, that question would have been that we begin at the very level of family into lower education. When I think of the time that I went to school, for example, in my country, and I began my primary school here, then did other higher education elsewhere, we had things like mountain climbing, right from small kids. We had things like wildlife education from class 1. We had things like joining clubs, and here is the community working together with the schools. Clubs such as Red Cross, where we learned first aid in primary school. So that by the time that I was going to mountain climbing, I knew what to do if any one of us had an accident. And we had things like 4K Club. These were clubs that you learned as a child what it means to run a small farm. So you have your own cabbage or tomato, little shamba, little garden, and you look after it. And there's inspection that is done at community level and at school level. And then there are these traditional networks that were there for a long time, like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and YWCA teens and all of these. These things really build character in people, but they also taught us to care for one another, because that's where you get the voluntarism. In the UWC's education, one of the important things that I'm very attracted to is encouraging the students to be part of the community and be part of the community and go to the community, not just to give, but to get from the community and to have another type of learning that often is not offered in academic subjects when we have to learn maths and geography and everything else that we have to learn. So in my case, for me, a transformative education is one that enters into us so that when I have to apply that head, heart, and hand, I know why I am doing those particular things, because it forms us as people. And I think it is that formation that sends us to accept leadership. It's that formation that helps us not to be afraid to travel to other places. And when we get there, to live normally with the rest of the people that we find there and not see our privilege as superiority complex. And we need an education that helps us to deal with when we get the privilege of an education, because we become privileged in education, and then we take the ladders down, and so other people are not able to come towards where what we have achieved. And that's why we continue to have a big gap between those who are educated and not educated, those who have and those who don't have, etc.
Perfectly put, Musimbi, and a perfect end to an evening in which we have been discussing so much about reimagining, but all of the things that we actually need to pull ourselves forward are literally sitting in our hands, in our homes, in our countries, and in our past. And we talk a lot about the future, the future, the future, but in the current and in the present, we have the time and the ability to actually also look at the past and bring a lot of these things into the present so that we can create and reimagine a future. And a reimagined future is not just one which is just technological advancement or just social advancement or just heart advancement. It literally is, as you said, Tom, it's the head and the heart and the hands. And all these things must come together laterally for everyone. And we have to be thinking outside of the privilege that so many of us, and I consider my education at United World College to be an absolute privilege, but one in which I was taught things that I completely agree and I connect with exactly what Musimbi, Tom, and Parag are saying, is that we're not going to be able to do this if we keep doing it from a top-down approach, which the entire world has actually been run through. And we're done with that. We need to get into the middle, and we need to get into the spaces and places that we haven't considered ever before. And we need to be bold about it. And we can't be hiding behind either the privilege of our backgrounds or where we live or where we don't live or where we haven't been. And, you know, this time that we've had where we haven't been able to really travel and to be into each person's countries and lives has for me been a personally most enriching time, because I was able to see the entire world in literally a grain of sand. And I think that we need to take the lessons that we've been given in these last 10 months and use them with education in a really deeply emotional way, but also in a way that has, for the people who need it, an understanding that everybody is included, that everybody has agency now, and we cannot turn away from anyone. And that really would be the future and the reimagining of education, at least for what we've been speaking about tonight, how I feel, and I know how you all feel as well, and the 200 odd people who joined us tonight in this great conversation. I know that we could go on for at least another hour, but it's 8:33, we're 3 minutes past. I have like 25 messages telling me, that's it, you're done, Anita. But thank you guys so much. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Musimbi. Thank you, Parag, for really bringing such beautiful, strong points. And I hope to everybody who's been watching us as well, this is only the beginning of the discussion. Our next Kishore Mahbubani Speaker Series event in Reimagining Learning series will be on the 9th of December, focusing primarily on digital learning and disruption. We have a very special guest, Bharat Anand, who is the Vice Provost of Advances in Learning at Harvard University. There's a lot that you can find out all about that on the UWCSEA website. And we will also be following up with a reminder to everybody about that event. And we will distribute a recording of tonight's program. For those of you who gave us questions that we couldn't answer, we only have that amount of time, but I'm sure that these questions will be answered throughout the series. Thank you so much for your time this evening and for sparking our thinking. Thank you guys once again for bringing yourselves here, bringing everything to the table, and let's reimagine. Let's go deep, let's go broad, and let's go all over the world, and let's bring everybody into this conversation, because it's not a conversation of a few, it's a conversation for many. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good night.